Welcome to Trampled Underfoot Podcast. Live. This is Eloy, and well, actually, that's Mark Lindsay over there, and this is Eloy over here, and we're coming at you. It's showtime. What's going on, Mark?
Oh man, just working my tail off outside. Finally got a landscape project done, and I'm feeling it.
Wow, dude.
Yeah, it's this getting old thing is not for sissies. I'm here to tell you what. You got to have some gumption to get old and still try to do stuff. And one of these days I'll knock it off. But you know what? I used to tease my neighbors, older neighbors, and what have you about hiring people to do their lawn and stuff. And now that kind of thing is starting to look really good to me. It's like, you know what? I've had my fun. It's time to start paying the pros.
It's good to you keep doing it, Mark. Do it all. Just keep doing it.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, but it's good to do it as for as long as people have because see, once you stop doing the lawn, you know what?
Now,
once a person stops.
Actually, I don't have a whole heck of a lawn left, and I'm fixing to have even less because, okay, this is way apropos of absolutely nothing at all. Okay. I mean, this is not what we intended to talk about, like we had a subject or anything like that. But when we bought this house, we knew we were going to have to do some landscaping. We are the second owners. The original owner, she was single at the time and she decided she didn't want lawn. So we're sitting on a fifth of an acre here. She covered almost the entire lot with 6 millimeter thick, well, not 6 millimeter thick, 6 mil black plastic, the entire lot. And then proceeded to bring in bark and gravel and put it here and there. Well, over the years, dirt has blown into the yard and that bark has broken down and decomposed and everything. And now we've got a gigantic weed patch about well, in some places you can see through it to the plastic, but up to about 3 to 4 inches thick on top of black plastic. And we have to take all that out, throw all the plastic away, and then bring in topsoil to plant a lawn. Well, I am not to that point yet.
Wait a second.
But I keep removing old dead sod and rolling up plastic and throwing that away.
Wait a second.
So, what's that?
In my brain, you had overcome that whole liner mesh.
Oh no, in little bits and pieces, yes, but I'm getting down to the last of it.
I thought to this day, like in my brain itinerary for your life, where I thought I was positioned until you just screwed it up for me. In my world, if I mapped out a world of everything and everyone around me, I thought that Mark Lindsay had overcome the liner under the thing, and I was relieved because the idea of having some sort of mesh and grass over it, and it bothers the hell out of me.
You know what? If it was mesh, I would leave it alone, but it's not mesh. It's black plastic. So the water doesn't absorb into the ground. It runs off right where I don't want it to run off. It runs right underneath the house, and I got to get rid of it. And it's been doing that since the 92, I think it is. So I got to get rid of that crap, and then I'm going to bring in topsoil and plant a lawn.
My friend Lewis and Clark. No, my friend Lewis that used to live across the way over here did that with his property because he was like, screw that. We're going to take care of business here and have a beautifully rocked off. And sure enough, he pulled every grass bit, left it dirt, stomped it, added rocks, added liner, or added sand, added liner, added rocks, added a fence border all around it,
Mm-hmm.
And literally for years, he had no grass popping up.
Well, that's fine if you use a landscape fabric that water can go through. If this was a landscape fabric, like I said, I would have just, brought in topsoil and put it over the, killed off the grass that's there, brought in topsoil and planted a new lawn. But I got to get rid of that plastic because the water, I'm not kidding you. We had in some areas of the backyard for the first 6 years we lived here, we had 3 to 4 inches of standing water in the wintertime. Between rain and what little bit of snow we get, it would just melt and there would be puddles. I mean, I joked about stocking them with trout, but it was that bad. So we don't have that issue anymore because I'm only about a third of the way done removing all the plastic off of this property.
Wow, that's quite the.
I keep making progress, but it's just me doing it little by little. And but this summer it's come to a head. I'm gonna do the entire backyard at once. I'm gonna go rent a dingo for a couple of days, do the entire backyard at once, get rid of all that, and then pay some poor sap to come haul away all the sod because I'm not doing it in my little cargo trailer behind the Jeep because I don't have a dump bed and I'm not shoveling it twice.
Why is it always a poor sap? This guy comes along, he's driving along, he's going to do that job. Maybe in his mind, he's like, oh boy, plastic up to my elbows. I can't wait.
Yeah, well, cha-ching, because nothing is free. But,
maybe he's thinking.
Let me just put it out there. And, it's my edit and I'll bleep it. There is a special room in hell for people who put plastic down and then put bark over the top of it. Use landscape fabric. That's what it's for. Because some poor sap like me is going to have to come along and take it up in 30 years. So, save some money. Use landscape fabric. Believe me, the world will love you for it.
What you're doing to future generations is unconscionable.
Mm-hmm.
How dare you people?
Oh, dude, there's a wild mixture. I mean, they put down 6 mil plastic, but then you can see where they ran out of plastic because they used everything from plastic garbage bags to blue Harbor Freight tarps. And I kid you not, I have dug out 2 blue tarps.
That's kind of that's over the top.
That's how redneck we are out here. They would rather go down and buy a blue tarp at Harbor Freight, lay it down and dump bark on it, then get another roll of plastic.
I was thinking trailer-ish. I wasn't even going into the but that's savage. But then again, to be honest with you, people all across the country do insanely not right things that don't. It's human. It's just I'll tell you one big mistake. I guess this is the planting episode. The shrub and the shrub.
Welcome to HGTV, the Trampled Underfoot Podcast version.
One big thing that I've learned that unfortunately it's never too. You know how they say it's never too late, but some things like gardening. Like I love these people that love gardening, and it is a pretty thing, but if I had it all to do over again, all of it, if I could rewind that VHS and see myself with all the broken up lines and everything, I would do things differently. I would contain things in pots and beds. You could do a bed, but the idea of planting straight to the soil, especially in Miami, you're going to get that plant propagate, grow, that bush. It'll be fertile because our soil is unbelievable. So if in Miami it's like that, I grew up listening to my parents say, son, in Cuba, and there's a whole thing here in Miami that you're not exposed to, but people in Miami, especially back in the day, not so much anymore. Back in the day, anything they'd say about Cuba was the topmost of the best. It was the best. So you could be in a conversation and with a Cuban old school and say, no, in Cuba, this, like the topping of the conversation was, yeah, but in Cuba, that my grandmother went to Spain with my grandfather in 74 or 76. They went to visit their family one last time, and she always told me the story in front of my grandfather, which he would not like. They visited their beautiful beach, El Sardinero, the Sardine, roughly thereabouts, and they drove up. The Spaniard taxi man opened the door. They got out. She looked around. She said, "And this is your famous beach? Varadero Beach is a million times better." In front of my grandfather visiting his home, and the taxi driver that's doing the, and he's saying, and the taxi driver turns and says, "What? So in Cuba the beaches are like sugary sand or something?" Because there was rough. This is the north of Spain, and there's the winds. It's a rough. I mean, across the way is England, and so it's a rough. And what the soil or the sand in the beaches in Cuba? And she said, "Yeah, they are. They're like sugar." So it's kind of that thing. So over here you couldn't. So it's always topping the thing. Well, they used to say that if not. If true here, that you can drop something here in the ground and if you leave it alone, it'll just go.
Yeah.
And it'll end up in your neighbor's. It just goes and goes, and it literally doesn't matter what.
It was that way in Hawaii too. It was things just went crazy.
It's because of the climate plus the and so in Cuba they used to always say, and I don't doubt it, but like I'm saying, the funny part is that in conversations you couldn't have any other. You could have any other. A Colombian could be there, anybody, and they'd end up saying something like, "Well, yeah, but," and so in Cuba they would take the seeds and just toss it on the ground, and it would just rip. It would go because it was like all set.
Well, it's tropical, yeah.
It was all set for stuff to just explode out of the ground, so it was very fertile and whatnot. So Florida does have that, and I would plant things in contained. If I could rewind the VHS now, I'd contained, because that way, if you change your mind, you're not stuck with it.
Yeah,
it's like
there are ways of getting rid of plants, but you have to kind of be, you have to kind of be careful. But there are ways of getting rid of plants. But we don't have the problem of things running uncontrolled, except for irises, the flower irises, because they, it's a root. It's called a corm, and they propagate. They put out more roots and keep going, and they will take over. They just spread all over the place. Now you can keep them contained with a physical border because you don't plant them deep, but everywhere inside that physical border, they will just take over and choke everything else out. Jeez. So, they're great for quick color, but they will take over, believe me. So, but there's one question I have, and I'm glad to see that my wife is here in the chat here on YouTube, is I dig the holes, but she's the gardener, and I want to know how that works. That's my experience with gardening. That's not my area of expertise. I dig the hole, I tell her the hole is dug, and then I leave. I go away. What happens after that, I don't know. It's none of my business. But I want to know how that works out. I dig holes, but she's the gardener. So you just like you just like a gopher. You're just digging little holes all over the place, and then but you don't live in them. No, I'm like a gopher. Yes, I dig the holes and then I go away. I don't what happens after that is none of my business. So, but that's fine. I don't care. We've got the division of labor set. She is finance and planning. I'm labor and transportation. But that's fine. It works. We have nurseries here that have gotten pretty fancy. Some are just the basic nurseries where you have your tarps and stuff. Kind of like the outdoor area of Home Depot, but in a private property. Yeah. And there's parts of the city out towards the country, what we would call, it's country, but it's so overpopulated. If you go further down, there's certain nurseries that have landscaping done. Sure. In that people just visit. At least I did, although I buy from it. But
just to walk around. It's so beautiful.
Yeah.
There's waterfalls and you can get lost in there. I mean, it's like acres and acres of just plants, and these people grow all sorts of indigenous, local stuff that are hurricane resistant, let's say. And I bought a lot of those hurricane resistant plants. I bought some I forget the name, Bahama bark, I think it is, or something. And they have different flowers. I got into gardening a lot, and there were so many. The reason I did was because at the time my old man was sick, and I was 24 hours paying attention to him. And as a hobby to keep myself busy and like sane, I started with a few little plants, but then I kept exploring, and try indigenous, try, local vegetation. Local vegetation. Well, in the beginning, everything's nice and contained. I had their little surround beds with the mulch, and enter like 13, 14 years down the line where I'm sitting now, and it's wild jungle. It's a wild jungle, and these trees are meant for here. But there's all sorts of little sprouting flowers that have like very weird shapes and smells to them. Berries that the birds come to. So they're meant for this region, and so I mean, people, if anything, planting those local trees are actually very good if you did it around the city and this and that. But people here just put palm trees down, and palm trees aren't even native to this area. I mean, there's a species of palm tree, but they're imported. Funny enough, there's certain one that we got, but it's not like those tall, beautiful ones.
Yeah, well, it looks tropical, and it gives you that feel, that tropical, background and everything. And they're relatively maintenance free, so folks dig them. I mean, literally as well as figuratively.
They do dig them.
Yeah, but man, I tell you what, it's nothing but work. And what you need to be a successful gardener, I've come to the conclusion, what you need is a cast iron back with a strong hinge. And that's all there is to it, because you're going to be digging, and that's all there is to it. You're going to dig holes, and that might mean with a pickaxe, that might mean with a shovel. But we've got so much rock here, forget about a shovel. You break it up with a pickaxe, then you can scoop it up with the shovel. It's rough, it's hard clay.
That's such a weird thing.
Yep.
The soil difference and stuff.
Oh, well, it's all over the place, man. We've got real tough clay here and rock like crazy. But hey, that's enough of the gardening. And we just spent 20 minutes on that. Good grief. It's funny. I did have a couple of little trivia things for you. And you can go take a short nap, Steve. This is about music. But this is for the audio portion of the podcast. So you folks here on the YouTube side, I think we've mentioned we record live on YouTube Tuesday nights, 6:30 Pacific, 9:30 Eastern. Go to YouTube, look for Trampled Underfoot Podcast. That's us. We'll be here Tuesday evenings. And we record an audio half, then we stop the audio portion, and then we start talking and interacting with folks in the live chat here.
I love how you separate. I love how you're trying to separate yourself from the beginning. You're trying. Let's turn the page, and you're working your way.
And I'm working my way. Some of us turn pages faster than others. But we're recording the audio for next week's podcast that'll be released. That's where I was going with this. So this will come out on June 1st, 2021, which will be the 54th anniversary of the release of Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band.
Yay!
54. You see, I'm doing this just to make you feel old, to make everybody feel old. 54 years ago.
It was 54 years ago today. Sgt. Pepper.
Got the band to play. That's right. And just by happy coincidence, 49 years ago today, the Eagles released their debut album that produced 3 top 40 singles. Take It Easy, Witchy Woman, and Peaceful Easy Feeling were on that first album. And that came out 1st of June, 1972.
That's amazing, dude.
All the good music is really getting old, my friend. Really getting old. 1972, I was 11 years old when that came out. And I vaguely remember hearing Witchy Woman, but I didn't really get into that style of music until I was like 13, 14 years old. So it had been out for a couple of years by the time I got into it.
For me, it took me into the 80s to begin to even listen to the. It's a funny thing because in the 80s, you know, it's really when I started to become aware and start choosing different my personal, what I thought were my personal tastes in the 80s. So from 1972, so you started actually consuming it when?
The Eagles, I really got hot and heavy into the Eagles when Hotel California came out. Then I went back and looked at their earlier stuff. I mean, they would come on the radio, but they always seemed kind of soft rock, mom and pop kind of music to me. I wasn't really into it much. You know, I was into, let's see, about that time, I was into Queen and a little bit of Pink Floyd. I was in that transitional period between AM top 40 and progressive rock, FM progressive rock. And so I didn't really care much about the Eagles. But when Hotel California came out, I mean, the first time I heard Life in the Fast Lane, that was it for me. It was like, oh man, this is good. And then I got the Hotel California album. Then I went back and started listening to their other stuff. And I'm like, man, I was wrong. There's some good stuff on these albums here. So, but the fact that is 49 years old this year, it's like, holy cow, man. Like I said, 1972, I was 11 years old and I didn't really care about it. In 67, when Sgt. Pepper came out, I was 6. So I didn't get into the Beatles until I was like 13 or 14 myself.
So 70, 75.
So yeah, they're about 74, 75, 76, right in there. I mean, you know, everybody else is getting into disco at about that time. It was just starting to pick up. And I was like, oh man, no, you got to listen to this. I got Abbey Road. And I mean, then it was Katie Bar the Door. I mean, I just started going back and finding all of the old stuff, Rubber Soul, Revolver, all of the old stuff. And that was my transgression. I mean, everybody else was, or not transgression. That was my trajectory. That's the word I was looking for. Saying the wrong word is my thing. But, you know, that was my trajectory. I was getting into the older stuff and starting to listen to not only just as a pedestrian, the music, but I was getting into it lyrically and always searching for that hidden meaning and always searching for that double meaning in the song and this, that, and the other, and got a little bit too deep into that kind of thing. And then finally decided to look, just sit back and enjoy it and go with it, you know. But it was, oh my gosh, the James Gang, the Beatles, geez, you name it. I mean, Queen, all over the place with the faster rock. Just, you know, anything but disco, please.
So my aunt was a big influence on me, my mom's sister, and she would be about older than you, maybe, or not maybe, older than you, maybe within a 10-year period or roughly thereabouts, let's say. And she would play and she'd take me everywhere, right, as a little kid, and buy me toys and stuff, just, you know, and what and on, and she would play music, and it would be Paul Simon sometimes. It could be Nina Simone, and she'd play all these things. So in one direction, I'd be listening to all these things, and then at home, because of friends and this and that, I'd be exposed to Metallica and this. So there was this whole multi-genre thing, and we've mentioned it before, but I consumed all the eras on one plate at the same time. So I had like all the volumes up till then available to me, and I literally dug into all the volumes as if they were stories, which they are, collections of stories with different sounds and stuff. And I remember listening to the oldies on the radio, a huge stereo that my aunt got me, with that graphic EQ. And I remember hearing Magic, the oldies station was my favorite. Every other song was a brand new aha moment for me, because they sounded so old, but so varied, and I couldn't help it. I was like, oh my goodness, look at this. And then I didn't know the who really the artists were, but I'd hear like, and here's this next one, Let It Be, and I'd hear Let It Be, and you know, and in my time of trouble, you know, and I'm listening to these voices, and then you'd hear the 50s stuff, and I'm like, holy. And so I grew up listening to it, but my friends didn't necessarily even bother with that. They were into the hair metal, which I was too. So it was all coming at me at the same time, and it was good. It was good. It was good. It was very interesting to have it all ready for you.
Yeah,
in a sense.
You know? I got a transistor radio when I was like 7 years old. And it was a thrill for me at night. I'm supposed to be going to sleep, lay there with that thing right next to my head on the pillow, just playing around with the tuning dial to try to pick up stations that you couldn't pick up during the day. And just to see how far away I could pick up stations from. And I would get Southern California and way up north in California. We were living in the San Francisco Bay Area at the time. And so that AM top 40 pop was with me all the time growing up. And this was when all that music was new and fresh and coming out. I mean, you know, Big Brother and the Holding Company, Janis Joplin, The Doors, Hendrix. I mean, all of that was coming out at the time. And I was still pretty young. I remember it all. Well, most of it, but nothing really stood out to me as I got to get this, because I was taking it all in. I mean, I loved the Temptations just as much as I loved, the Beatles. You know, I liked, they were splitting genres. Back in the early days, it was all still rock and roll, whether it was doo-wop or, you know, if it was Buddy Holly or the Platters, it was still all rock and roll. But they were starting to split the genres, and the parting ways a little bit. So you started having rhythm and blues stations that was real rhythm and blues. And then you had the pop stations. And then it wasn't until they started letting them boost the power on the FM side, you started getting FM rock stations, and they would start going in the harder directions and then eventually into the progressive rock directions. But that top 40 pop was what I grew up on. And it was just a mishmash. I mean, you would have stuff from the early 60s, from the Beach Boys, you know, Surfing Safari or Surfing USA or whichever. And then all of a sudden they would get into, you know, Booker T and the MGs with Green Onions. And then, oh gosh, I mean, just go in 15 different directions. I Hear You Knocking by Dave Edmunds. And so it was that constant mix that made me the music lover that I am today in all kinds of genres. I mean, I don't fix myself on any one thing anymore. I do find myself going back to the blues a lot, but
Yeah.
I can get just as into Paul Simon as I can get into Muddy Waters or B.B. King.
Yeah, me too.
So
I'm with you on that. I think it's kind of true though. You did, even though you were closer to that, and there was a 20-year explosion that you came in the latter part of and through.
mm-hmm.
So there was like a 20-something year like sort of block where there was all this stuff that I consider you can't even say it's within the same block style, but there's something there that it all magic. You were at that latter half roughly thereabout of this burst of music magic that that to this day, man. I mean, I but then again, I'm biased.
Well, and I am too. Don't get me wrong, I am too. But it was about the time that the sounds and the music they were making were starting to become more and more specialized. You had Black Sabbath come along, and it was all hard. It was all heavy. Even some of their calmer tunes had that heavy sound to it. Just pick up the Paranoid album. But it was, I don't know, it was all mixed together. And I don't think that anybody realized how profound some of the stuff was. I mean, it was all being listened to. I mean, we had 5 top 40 stations, AM top 40 stations there in the Bay Area, between San Francisco and San Jose. And, radio program to all of them. And if a song come on that you didn't really care for, you hit the button and go search for the next one, But it's when they started that separation and started branching out, people started getting more selective. And maybe you don't want to listen to rhythm and blues anymore. Maybe you want to focus on the top 40 pop, or maybe you want to focus on that heavier, harder rock, or maybe you want to get into the more folk-based stuff, Joni Mitchell or John B. Sebastian or something like that.
Or maybe you want to listen to a little bit of the disco, or maybe the breakdown of different discos.
Well, see, that's what I mean, because that bled into the top 40 pop. And so you would take 5 songs over whatever time period, probably 3 of them were disco.
Last Chance.
And then 4.
Romance.
But they were there for popular music. They were there to get the listeners, and that's what people wanted to hear. So they played, I mean, in the early 70s, they got into this thing where they were playing movie theme songs. And I remember Mike Oldfield and Tubular Bells, the theme from The Exorcist, was one of the big hits. And then Marvin Hamlish with the theme to The Sting was a big hit. And it was constantly being played.
Wasn't it The Entertainer that was the Sting?
Yeah, The Entertainer, yeah.
I remember years during my time, which was after, because along with it, when you're listening on the radio, all these different sounds, you're listening to the sounds. You're not, as a kid, you're not necessarily attaching any look to these sounds.
Mm-hmm.
TV does give you that sense, like, you can see the connections and stuff. But as a kid, like fresh slate, blank paper, canvas, let's say. I remember watching The Outsiders movie, which was that movie. It was like, I guess 50s, where they'd have their white shirts, t-shirts with the rolled up sleeves, the jeans with the cigarette pack rolled into and the hair was always slicked back and stuff. And then there was the other groups of kids, and it was like gang type things from the 50s. And I remember watching that and thinking, oh, I'm for sure a greaser. My dad had the hair slicked back. I remember him like that. My grandfather, the same. I mean, I said, oh, I definitely identify that those are the guys. It happens to be that those were the good guys in the movie, let's say.
Mm-hmm.
But they had a look attached to their era.
Right.
And then in the 60s, you had all this other whole style of look, and then enter the drag queen look of the 80s, which was very difficult.
But you missed the late 60s and early 70s where it became natural, just whatever. You didn't get a haircut. Some guys would shave, some guys didn't, but beards were no longer just strictly for sailors or railroad engineers or guys like that. The beards all of a sudden were being seen everywhere, and huge mustaches and sideburns that look like you glued 2 pork chops to the side of your head. In fact, they called them mutton chops. I mean, when you see a guy with sideburns down to his lower jaw, your 60s and early 70s. Yeah. But
that was Elvis, by the way. That was the inspiration for that. Was completely Elvis.
That was everybody, man. It became the thing. People of all races, of all colors, of all backgrounds.
If you remember in the early Elvis movies, he didn't. In the beginning, he didn't. His sideburns would just finish right where normal people would finish. But as you progressively got through the era, and he was probably in. Okay, so this is my take and my opinion. Elvis was the one, the trailblazer on that, and the hair. I mean, the Beatles were inspired with Elvis's hair, so they wore the hair. Not the hair that we all have come to learn, like the Beatle hair, but if you look at the early photos of the Beatles, they were all doing like the pompadour, which was a 50s thing, but Elvis was, in my opinion, even though they all did like, what's this? I can't even think of anybody except Elvis right now, personally. There were others,
Buddy Holly,
Summertime, well, I'm gonna make a fuss. Yeah, I'm gonna.
Yeah, I can't remember their names.
I can't think of it. They all had that look.
Right. Oh yeah, Jerry Lee Lewis had the slick back. I mean, Buddy Holly. All of them had that. I mean, you want to see something funny? Go look for some old pictures of Jimi Hendrix. He had the slick back pompadour, if you can believe that, back in the day.
Pump a fro.
Yeah. Well, it was he had it all slicked back. Chuck Berry did the same thing. I mean, but then that became, and see, that was the dirty little secret that people don't think about. The only difference between the length of Elvis's hair and the length of the Beatles' hair, there was none. Elvis greased his up and slicked it back. The Beatles didn't. They had about the same length hair. And that was seen as just completely radical. You just didn't do that. And, I mean, you were talking about your dad and your grandpa. They all, had the slick back hair and everything. In my family, it was flat tops and crew cuts. I mean, if you had hair longer than that, it was time to go get a haircut. I say this like the audio people can see my fingers. If you had hair more than about 3/4 of an inch long, it was time to go get a haircut. It should stand up. It should not be long enough to lay down. And if it started laying down, it was time to get a haircut.
My grandfather had literally I can't say it's long by today's standard, but enough so that you could slick it back and completely slick. And my dad did the same. And my dad had the freaking long sideburns as well. I grew up looking at that as a little kid until but he'd always have, and so I'd look, to me, it's like looking at my dad was like looking at the past to a certain, like he had that certain look that I could reference to those early 50s type, and he was from that era.
Right. Some guys could get away with that. Some guys could pull off that hairstyle. I was not one of them. But I didn't try. I wasn't allowed to let my hair grow that long until I was about 13, 14. But by then, longer hair was more acceptable. So, but it all came from that Summer of Love and that hippie thing in San Francisco that spread all over the world, and it was music just exploding. It was freedom exploding. I mean, we talked a little bit about it on our last episode. You had guys like Lenny Bruce and George Carlin actually getting put in jail for quote unquote obscenity, and all the fights that came out, all the court battles that came out over that. And it was just, express yourself and total freedom. And it was a wild time to be alive, because it was, it was just an explosion of color, an explosion of sound, and an explosion of smiles. There were some very bad times during them. You had the war in Vietnam, you had the civil rights movement going, you had protest marches and riots and things of that nature. But to the average person walking around on the street, it was just like, the clouds had parted and let the sun shine in. Fifth dimension.
Let the sunshine.
Yep.
The Beatles, there's some mentions of the Beatles, and Eddie Cochran was the one we were thinking about. So like everybody's on point. Like you can't, they don't miss. So the Beatles themselves, that haircut, if you look at the old performances from other bands, once the Beatles came in their own, they all did the haircut. And in fact, you can find videos on YouTube currently of different bands, which I can't think of a single one currently where their haircuts that way. But even their foot action in their little dance, it does the little George Harrison skip side to side, and the facial expressions, like they took snapshots. It was so influential that you'd see people copying their actual physical and their guitars, everything across the board. And the funny thing is this: even though they were doing that, and like you could say, oh man, what, like in the 80s as kids we would say, oh man, they're totally biting off of this band Metallica. That's a bite. That's how we used to talk. That's a bite right off of Metallica's Kill 'Em All album. Yeah, I know, dude. Yeah, that's how we used to talk. Well, even though they were biting off of those bands, the Beatles, I'm sorry, and those bands were biting, they had their own unique, new reinvented sound that sprang from it that was as freaking awesome.
They developed that. But you had like the Beau Brummels were a total Beatles ripoff band. Paul Revere and the Raiders were a total Beatles ripoff band. The Byrds were just completely 100%. And I mean, all the way down to the instruments. Everybody had to get a Rickenbacker 12-string guitar.
Which I don't like.
Because George Harrison played one.
What a crap,
in my opinion. Songs. I like the sound. I have always liked the sound of a 12-string. Always liked it.
The Rickenbacker.
Well,
I've played the Rickenbacker before, and by the way, I played it once for a nice. But I played it, and it was like the expensive Rickenbacker, and it felt weird. And there's videos out there which I've noticed where they say, "Is this a one trick pony?" And for the Rickenbacker, and they have arguments over it and stuff. It has to fit you. The instrument, you can't just grab an instrument and say, okay, this is you could, but it needs to fit you.
The problem with it was it became a cliche, and you notice nobody uses them anymore because everybody associates it with early Beatles. And even at the time, now, one of the masters of the 12-string Rickenbacker was Roger McGuinn, from the Byrds. But even he said, no, we got to get rid of this thing because it was always going to be associated with early Beatles. And maybe being a Beatles copy band or tribute band, however you want to say it, let's just say it like it is. Even being a Beatles ripoff band wore pretty thin afterward, after a little while. And then they had to start branching out. I mean, they started playing songs that were written by Bob Dylan and other songwriters and quit trying to copy the Beatles style. Yeah. But I mean, you watch some of their early work of all of these bands, and they dressed like the Beatles. They acted like the Beatles on stage. They would do their little dance, and when they were done, they took that Beatle bow. They wore the boots. They wore the same tailored jackets and shirts, the whole thing, because that's what sold. You know? Yeah. And then they finally branched off into their own different directions and became what they later became. But that was okay, because back then, even if something sounded like the Beatles, you knew it wasn't the Beatles. You know, and as the Beatles, as they grew and changed their sound, the others started to change their sound as well. And then everybody went their separate ways. But there for a little while, everybody wanted to be the Beatles. Everybody.
The one instrument that, I mean, I haven't played all the Beatles. I did like the Gretsch, to be honest with you. I'm guilty of that. Mm-hmm. I did like the Gretsch guitar. So I bought a Gretsch type looking guitar. Mm-hmm. I had a Gretsch until I gutted it, which wasn't a high-end Gretsch, but I did get that semi-hollow body shape of that old school, because I liked it so much, and I really do. I like it. I like the look of it and like the era, and it gives you a feeling of like you're in that vibe and that era when you have that on you and you're playing. But the Beatles, and I bought the Beatles. See, I'm a Beatles fan, and I bought the Beatles bass as well, the Hofner. And to be honest with you, the Hofner is, to me, the perfect bass for me.
Now, let me ask you this about that. I've heard from a couple of people who play bass guitar, and they have all said the same thing, that is a hard instrument to play just because of the size of the body, because it's a small body as compared to other bass guitars.
It's just totally the opposite.
Really?
It's totally the opposite. But then again, maybe they're like super bass players that like the long neck. Who knows what their story is, but it's totally the opposite. No, the Beatles bass is easier.
It's all the body size. They prefer a larger body. They said if you're standing up playing, it's fine. But if you're trying to sit down, that itty bitty thing, it's like one guy said it was like trying to play a ukulele with a long neck.
If you're sitting down,
it's hard to hold on to.
If you're sitting down, the shape of that violin is not set up for lapping it, and being able to sit it on your knee to play comfortably. So that is true. You have to work around. But as far as the reach of the neck and being able to finger the notes quickly and the sound itself that it has, it's a beautiful. I mean, if I had one bass guitar, which I do now, I had an Ibanez, which is actually sitting outside. It's sitting outside, the neck crack, and I was like, oh, I'll put this in one day, and I left it outside. That's that. But it was always a pain to play. So when I played bass, it was uncomfortable on an excruciating level. And then when I got the violin bass, the Beatles bass, everything was like quick magic runs. Everything was, and you felt cool, So, it's all what the comfort of you. But I like that instrument a lot, and yes, it is comfortable. But when you're putting it on your knee to sit down and play, it can slide on you because the shape of that violin. So it does have that drawback, but
Yeah. Okay. Well, I don't know. See, the only thing I can play is a stereo. So I just have to go by the words of other people. And, it just depends. Some folks like the larger body, like on that Gretsch you were talking about. Probably the king of the Gretsch guitar currently, it would be, Brian Setzer. I love listening to him play. And I mean, he just absolutely wails on that thing. But some people like that style of body. Some people love the ubiquitous Stratocaster, and some folks go for the Explorer. I mean, it's just, it just depends on you do you. So,
yeah.
But that explosion of sound that was coming out during that time was just something to, but I know we as listeners, I don't know about the musicians, I can't speak for them, but I know that the majority of we, the listeners, didn't really realize how profound some of this stuff was that was coming out, because there's some good stuff back there.
Not until you got a few decades of the crap that came after.
Well, I mean, just listening to stuff you've listened to 1,000 times, you know, pick anything. I mean, you give somebody 10 years of listening to A Day in the Life off of Sgt. Pepper. It's going to mean different things at different periods of your life. You know, it just, I don't know. That's been my experience anyway. I mean, something as simple as Lady Madonna didn't really mean a whole hell of a lot to me when I was 14 or 15 years old. Now it does have a little bit of meaning.
But it sounded cool.
It sounded cool. That was the whole thing. You know, it sounded cool. That was it.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I mean, but there's no era after that. And I would easily, if I were what's the word, generous, I would extend the magic and waning, right? Waning, I'm sorry.
Mm-hmm.
From the 50s all the way to the 80s. And if I were generous, I'd put it into the early 90s, because even though it's not the same story, you know, you have to give it up for, it's not the same story, but like Nirvana and all these bands that came out at that time. And I know it's marking my ending point in that spectrum, but they had enough reference material and connection to the generations past within what they were producing, albeit altered in their own style and sound.
Right.
That there was a fidelity in that window right up until the early to mid 90s. But it was the trickling, the end, like the magic dust was sort of like dissipating. And if you mark from the mid 90s, you could make that mark at the 90s, or you could push it even back into the mid 80s and say, nope, right here's where it stopped. You could play around with those, but for sure from the mid 90s, if not a little bit earlier, going into our time now. If you can give me a block of songs, like you could shoot off from the eras past of awesomeness, then I'd be like, oh wow, you can do that. But I don't think that people can.
It depends on how hard you look and where you're looking, because I mean, there was some good music coming out. I mean, all the way up, you know, you had a new crop coming in. You know, Kenny Wayne Shepherd showed up in the late 80s and early 90s, and then Robin Ford, and just keep going. I mean, Pat Travers is still touring. You've got guys like that are keeping the flame alive. And I mean, you know, heck, AC/DC just put out a new album.
Yeah, but
so
that's
but what I'm getting at is you had to look harder for it. It wasn't the popular style. But if you knew the artists, you knew where to go to get it. You know what I mean? It wasn't the popular music. You're absolutely right. I mean, you know,
no, not just that.
But the 80s had a lot of that crap too.
No, but not just that. If you can't, I mean, you can if you want, but I'm not saying taking people from back in the day,
right,
that have kept going till now.
Well,
I'm
no,
just saying,
and me too. I'm talking about like Kenny Wayne Shepherd came along, and then here comes Robin Ford, and along with the older guys, but they were the new and up and comers.
But can you really bring out that cake full of all the little, you know, and say, hey guys, look at this fiesta that we're about to
and that's what I mean. You had to look harder for it because it wasn't in the popular music, you know.
Yeah, it in the 2000s, and that's not to say that there's not awesomeness occurring. It's just that the effectiveness of it, like branching out, rooting into popular culture on a massive level. Then again, it might be because I'm old, so I don't know but I think that it's not the same. I don't think that it's I think that that door opened and closed during that window, precisely because of other cultural things that occurred, like the advent of the internet and digitizing everything and on-demand stuff, and the division of people's focus because of it. I think that door closed at some point, wherever that point was, whether it was the 80s. I don't think it was the 80s. I think it was the mid 90s personally.
Yeah.
But and that was the end of it. But from that point on, from that 50s and to that point on, to that point after that, I think it's not the same.
No, you're absolutely right about that, because from the 50s to about I'll give you the mid 80s, it was a kaleidoscope, because it was happening in all different directions all at once. People were kind of figuring out who they were and what genre they were. And it was going in every direction, man. It was Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young over here on this side. Then it was Leonard Skinner and Molly Hatchet over on that side. It was, and everything in between.
Yeah.
But then it specialized too much. And you had certain people who were kind of pigeonholed into this one little thing. And if they played outside of that pigeonhole, it was crap. That was the popular opinion anyway.
Yeah.
And I've never believed that. You know, I've always likened music to art in this respect. I may not know how it was done, but I know what I like. And if I like a tune, I don't care who sang it. I don't care who played it. You know, if it's good music, it's good and I like it. That's all there is to it. But if I don't like it, you can't convince me to like it. And I think everybody is that way. You know, some people are more open-minded than others.
It's all subjective.
Yeah. But I mean, you're right in that you don't get the variety that you did. And it wasn't coming out. I mean, there were new records being released every damn day back then. I mean, you know, we got another brand new song for you here on Top 40 AM 1060 KFBY Midford, you know, whatever. And there was a new song being released every day and a new group coming out every month, it seemed. And you don't have, it's not that fast anymore. It's easier for people to record music and get it out to the public. But I think we talked about this once before. When you have that many people doing it, it's like we have so many options. Where do you go? You know, when you had a few AM top 40 rock and roll stations playing essentially the same music, just on a different rotation schedule, they were more or less guiding what music you listened to. And those handcuffs are off. You can go in any direction still, but you can find a new performer on YouTube or on any of the streaming services every hour of the day and never, every minute of the day, and never hear all of them that are putting out good stuff
ever again in your life. You'll never, there's not ever again. You'll always have, there's always something that you can explore. There's so much volume. Do you remember the movie Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark?
The Raiders of the Lost Ark, yeah.
And all the stuff that Indiana Jones had to go through to actually finally like win the day and get the item, and then only for at the end of the movie for the warehouse doors to open and the guy in the little cart pushing
the ark,
and there was like endless boxes of arcs in there. They didn't say they're arcs, but they all the boxes have the same shape. So in my mind, I'm looking at this, all these boxes in this huge warehouse that's endless has the different arcs. So it leaves you with I liked that sort of, and they put it in the shelf and stuff, and there's just like an endless row.
Yeah.
Well, music, anything you put that you make, is like that struggle in your personal. It could be a guy in a garage band, in a garage or basement, and they record and prepare their stuff. And as soon as you're done, in the greater scheme of the world, it's sort of like that arc in the box. You're putting it on that shelf. Hopefully somebody's gonna. But there's so many options for people that they walk into the warehouse of music, and they're like, so the luck of getting spotted, and then that person that spotted it, or a few people that spotted it, saying to their buddies, because it's that good, hey man, you got to check this out. It's all subjective, but for them, and then that sort of like explodes into the chances of that for one single, without the help of some sort of mainstream media pushing a girl dancing up and down with like little wings on her and like licking a lollipop, without the help of like a major, it is what it is. It's inside the warehouse of the lost.
And that's the problem. When you hit exactly the right word when you said luck, because people, I
thought it was lollipop.
People have to, well, maybe that too. But people have to discover it. It's hard. It's easier to make music, but it's harder to stand out, because when you have that many people diluting the viewer base or the listener base, because people have so many options out there, a lot of people just give up and just listen to whatever. You still have people listening to the radio just to find out what other people are listening to nowadays. Then they'll go off on a direction like that. So it's harder to get noticed. It's harder to stand out, and everything starts to sound the same because it's being processed the same way on the same digital equipment. It's like you can walk down the street and you can tell which people shopped at the same store because they're all wearing different colors of the exact same thing. Well, it's that way with music. Maybe you don't know the name of the program they're assembling their music with, but you can tell how they did it if you listen to it. It's, and I said this before when we were talking about music, it's like they have found a formula. If they follow this formula, you want this element, this element, and this element. If you follow the recipe, your biscuits will turn out good.
Yeah.
They'll turn out good, but that doesn't mean anybody's going to want to eat them. It all starts to sound the same. So you've got to try to stand out. And how do you do that today?
Like I said, maybe you put a girl on a huge ball and chain, and you swing her in an empty room, and she's got a mallet in her hand, and she's licking the mallet as she's swinging, and she's singing about a wrecking ball, and the depth of the story evolves. Wrecking ball, wrecking ball, wrecking ball.
And
wrecking ball.
There's a lot of truth to that, but having a daddy that was already in the industry doesn't hurt. And already being a child star on a major network doesn't hurt. So she didn't have to do much to stand out. But I mean, you've got 3 guys in a garage somewhere in Oklahoma City who are making killer music right now, and nobody's ever heard of them because the way the music gets to us is different. It's just completely different.
I'm a rock and roller at heart, but if you have a picture of 3 guys in some sort of garage, with a cigarette butt in his mouth and stuff and clanking away, and then you have this girl swinging on a wrecking ball.
So you're going to
she's looking. No, I'm saying if you have that juxtaposed, I'm not going to lie, my vision, it'll be like this, man, those guys are really rocking. Wrecking ball. I turn my head. Yeah, there's the power of the visuals, the MTV, the visual connection to it. It's almost as you shelve the music because the visuals are too down. And it's been tested, dude. People.
Oh yeah, I am not disagreeing with you. But that's one of the main reasons I find it so ironic that the very first music video that was played on MTV was the Buggles Video killed the radio star.
And
it did.
True. It totally did.
But I have to ask the question that came to my mind when you said that. You're sitting there telling me that you would rather watch Miley Cyrus swing back and forth.
No, I'm saying
and not watch ZZ Top.
No, I'm saying, well, actually, when it comes down to it, I'd rather watch visually. And by the way, she doesn't have to be on a wrecking ball. She it doesn't matter. Dude, it doesn't matter what she's sitting on. It doesn't. She could be at the grocery store looking for canned whatever.
You and I have to have a discussion after the show.
No, I'm being brutally honest and transparent of something that I think that we all intrinsically know is that the use of sex is and sexualizing is so it's almost like it's a like I know what it is, right? It's innate in human beings. It's the whole thing, but it's sort of like a you're covering up for all the you're covering up for all the warts. You're covering up for the lack of rich music with something else. It's like stinking up a room and throwing on some cologne and walking out the door to a party saying that'll do. You're masking.
Yes.
From the source. Yes. So I understand what it is, but I'm being honest. You could have ZZ Top there. Yes, you could have ZZ Top there. You could have Eric Clapton there. And I love Eric Clapton. But if you put Wrecking Ball next to the thing, and I had visually, if I had no choice, if I was strapped to a chair, my eyes would go back to the Wrecking Ball. It's gonna go to the Wrecking Ball, and I know Eric Clapton's there. He kicks butt. And you know what? In my mind, I'll think, Eric, you kick butt, man. Now hold on while I check out Wrecking Ball because the brain.
But you're missing the most obvious, and that is you turn down the volume on Miley Cyrus and you crank up ZZ Top. That's a whole nother video.
I don't want to look at Eric that way.
No. You crank up ZZ Top. Believe me, if you're watching Miley swing back and forth on that wrecking ball while you're listening to Tush, it's a whole nother video.
I see it now.
But that's been going on for decades. You don't think they put Marilyn Monroe in the movies because they thought she could act, do you? No, it was not about her acting ability, because believe me, there were a ton of better actors than her. So,
I mean, the allure, it's the most fundamental innate thing in human beings, and as far as males are concerned, there's all these activities. There's the music. You can be painting on the side of some sort of park, this beautiful water fountain, and you're reproducing it there. Photographers, or there's people that clay pots. You get all of it, and you might not be in a particular mood necessarily, but when a visual, because we are built in that way, music isn't. Not that it isn't supposed to or not supposed to. It's supposed to be in the brain, in the ears, in the imagination. But when you take to the effectiveness of all this was taking these imagery and squishing it with the music, and the music took a back seat to the imagery. So it doesn't have to be. And by the way, Elvis, for the ladies, in a different way, but it's the same thing. It's the same thing. It's like you have this very attractive, iconic guy dancing like a wild man, very, very, very good at what he does, and that's a symbolic and so that stuff.
Sure it does, and it goes both ways. Yes, I mean, God, I can remember growing up, my aunt, who is my father's sister, who is, I think she's about 4 or 5 years older than me. She was a surprise. Growing up, I mean, she bounced back and forth from Davy Jones of the Monkees to Donny Osmond to David Cassidy from the Partridge Family, and it just went on and on and on from there. I mean, yes, you're absolutely right. Sex sells 100%. So, you know, you got somebody who maybe doesn't look all that good, but can sing. You put them in a more serious setting. You take somebody who does happen to look good, you're going to put them under the bright lights and highlight that. And that's always been the case. That has always been the case. Just a natural fact of life. Men look at women and women look at men. And people in marketing know that.
There's another bit. And by the way, that's just, it is that, exactly that. Mm-hmm. There's another thing which we've talked about too, but notice how it's really that we're mm-hmm. saying. Notice that it's really that with this example. Yeah. There are situations where the voice and the mm-hmm. music doesn't match the look. Mm-hmm. And so executives in some smoky room, low lit room, in some like 13th floor, you know, decide, music executives, to create an image for the sound because it's more sexual, and they pump it out to and so you'll have things like the Milli Vanilli duo, which, by the way, it was so cringy in my opinion. I remember watching that and I never understood. I looked at girl, you know it, and the dancing, but and then the little mops in the head and the dancing and the dancing in unison. I used to see that come up on the TV, and I'd be like, how can people even like this? I didn't even know people around me that even liked it. I couldn't ask anybody.
And there's an illustration of the differences in your generation and mine, because we heard the music. We didn't have the visual. You didn't see them performing it unless it was done like on Don Kirshner's rock concert or the Midnight Special. And the thing about those was they played live right there. It wasn't music videos. So you didn't see that. When if Milli Vanilli had come out in the 60s, you'd have just heard the music. You wouldn't have seen the people.
But wait a second. In the case of Milli Vanilli, that although that applies, but what I was trying to, I mean, the reason, so that you're saying is totally true, but the reason I picked Milli Vanilli was because they weren't even the people singing it.
Right.
But, and then people were offended when they realized that they weren't the people singing. And this happened in a few cases throughout history. Yeah. People were offended that the goods that they were given weren't the authentic thing. And people were like what? And then that tanked their career. But like you were saying, it's a audio. Mm-hmm. What do you call it? Genre. It's an audio experience. Right. It's not a visual. And you could have visuals to go, like you said, in certain occasions on special, Johnny Carson, whatever the case. But once you introduce the visual thing, you start making. I start becoming judgmental. Oh, I'm not gonna look at that.
And you know, again, video killed the radio star.
Totally.
Because now you not only have to sound good, you have to look good. If you don't have the look as well as the sound, you won't make it. There's some ugly people out there making great music, and nobody cares.
I'm willing to bet. I'm not going to say how much, but I'm willing to bet with the amount of people that exist on this planet, even though we're saying this, there were some holdouts that said, I don't care if they can. Like, they were so fanatical and they were so shallow about it, and they were just totally sold on it, and they're not going to turn back now. Like, they're stubborn and they dug in their heels. There's got to be at least one person out there that to this day, like anybody would have their Beatles collection and posters and like their little shrine. Yeah. I am sure that there's some person out there with a Milli Vanilli shrine with all their albums alphabetized and the posters and T-shirts. I'm sure
That would be very easy to make that collection because they only put out one album. But but yeah, you're right.
Wait, but if you buy all 12 songs and singles,
but it was several years. I mean, there were radio stations that wouldn't play those songs. They wouldn't play any of their music. It took several years. You do hear it every once in a while.
No, but did you see in the video? Did you see the video where it happened? Like the CD player got stuck on it and says, "Girl, you know it's girl you," and you see, and they're dancing, but at some point they're like, "Wait a second, this isn't supposed to," and they have this dumbfounded look on their face for like a minute, running around like chicken. You know what they look like? Like when you chop a chicken and they're just bleeding out and running around. They were bleeding out on stage.
It's kind of like what's her name, Ashley Simpson, who has still recording albums, but she got caught lip syncing on Saturday Night Live, and that just ended her. She still records, just nobody cares.
You know what?
But that's our fault. We believe the hype. We believe the media hype. You were talking about people got so outraged and offended about Milli Vanilli. That's because that's all they talked about. You're supposed to be outraged. You were cheated. You were lied to. Dude, it's just a song on the radio. What do you care?
Let me tell you this one little. I experienced slightly what that feels like. I'm going to give you a quick one. Mm-hmm. So for years, I have recorded. Lately, not so much. Mm-hmm. But I've recorded at home using the Pro Tools and this and that. And years ago, because I've had it for like over a decade, since it basically came out, at least that one version that was better than the first version. So second generation Pro Tools is the one I had that I started with, which was probably late 90s, something like that. And I'd recorded. I had a friend over, and I was recording a music video. I had recorded me and said, "Oh, let me show you this," because I did the video for the audio that I had recorded. The audio I recorded, it's me. But when you do your video to match up with the audio, you just lip sync it. Right. And like, let's say if a verse is like, "Because she's great, blah blah blah," let's say. In the actual recording of the visual, you don't have to sound good. You just have to mimic your lips. So I'm like, "Yeah, she's great, blah blah blah," and I was doing like vocally. I wasn't even. So I said, "Oh, I gotta show you this. This is how it sounds without the." And I showed it to her, and I could see the disappointment in her, because in her, at least I was imagining she was thinking that the whole thing was one live performance, and that there wasn't the technique of syncing the visual to the actual. You work hard on the audio and you get the notes right and you do this, but when you're doing the video, sure, if you can pull it off, but when you're doing take after take after take, you're like, right, yeah, because you start sort of like just because all you're doing is filling in little clips. Well, she saw, and I could see the disappointment of her in me, and the quality of me showing her that behind the scenes stuff. And I said, "Oh my goodness." So in her mind, she probably thinks I'm not capable of the other thing, even though I recorded the other thing, because she saw that division. Right. So it does affect. Sure, it does, but not to that point. I mean, let's be honest. Does anybody really care who sang that song, "Girl, You Know It's True"? And if they do care, why? If they don't care, why aren't the guys who really sang that song and performed all the music on that album, why aren't they now famous and popular? Because the guys who did do the performance, they did a good job. They sounded good. Contractual problems where they're not allowed to. But we're talking about 30 years ago now. You know? Yeah, but if you give away the rights to, and you can't, it's all in the contract. Understood, but that doesn't mean you can't make other music somewhere else, you know? The visuals are important nowadays and stuff, Yeah, and I don't agree with it. In a lot of ways, I don't agree with it, but I do understand it. I do understand it, but I still think it's kind of petty of us to get that outraged.
You know, it basically you didn't just end the careers of those two guys who were the faces of the music. You ended the careers of all the musicians involved and some of the people behind the scenes who did, the engineers or
Yeah, but they made,
the
dude, they made
promoters and all that other stuff.
That's true, but that money machine.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
how much of it did they have to give back? How much of it went away because they couldn't fulfill the contract? I mean, were they signed for a 4-album deal? They only made one.
No, I'm saying that. Okay, so yeah, right. But
they had to give back their Grammys and all that stuff.
What I'm saying is, though, that for a test run attempt,
mm-hmm.
Even though that happened, they were a success.
They were.
You know what I'm saying? So, like, even though it flamed out,
right.
Their little gig was like winning the lottery.
Yeah, it was for a while.
Yeah.
And now that and $5 will get them a cup of coffee,
People still listen to that song, I'm sure.
Yes, they do. And you, again, I've heard it on the radio. I have heard it. It's coming. It's in rotation again, where it used to be nobody would play it because everybody was so. The selective moral outrage we have, I guess, is what I'm getting at.
Well, it's entertainment fluff.
Yeah, exactly. It's hype. It's the Hollywood hype machine. You're supposed to feel this way about it. But I just don't. Well, there's something wrong with you. You're part of the problem.
Yeah, it is what it is. But there was a lot of songs that we would make fun of, like, don't go chasing water. Like, as kids, we'd be like, what the hell is this crap? Yeah, man, what the heck? Hey man, why don't they play heavy metal more, man?
Dude,
and stuff like that.
Yeah, well, you're talking to somebody who had to suffer through the Osmond Brothers, the Partridge Family, the Cowsills, things like that. And I'm like, dude, come on. No, get back to the Beatles, please. How about some Blood, Sweat, and Tears? Creedence Clearwater Revival is good. No, we got to listen to Sean Cassidy. To do run, 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 to do run, run. Oh,
I like that the original song of that.
The first 100 million times was okay.
I met her on a Sunday and my heart stood still.
Yeah.
All right.
And with that, let's go ahead and wrap it up.
I love how you put me in the I mean, I sing a little line and you totally Milli Vanilli me. All right, guys, this is a wrap.
Was that Milli Vanilli or Jackie Mason? Get out. Get off the stage.
Folks, we go live every Tuesday at 9:30 Eastern and 6:30 Pacific. And that's here at the Trampled Underfoot Podcast on YouTube. But we also have a Facebook page, and that's Trampled Underfoot Podcast on Facebook. And we many a times put up, pictures or links to the things we talk about when we find something within the conversation that we want to point out and find interesting for you. So we do that over there. And we also accept show ideas over there at Trampled Underfoot Podcast on Facebook. So be sure to check those out. And so we're also sponsored by
Steve Nealon over at Harneal Media. He sponsors the Trampled Underfoot Podcast. Excuse me. Let me say that again. Let me start that all over. It's my edit, so I can chop this part out, which now means I have to leave it in because I said that. Steve Nealon over at Harneal Media. He sponsors TrampledUnderfootPodcast.com. That's our website. You head over there, you click on that Wayback Machine link, and that'll take you to all of our past episodes. This being episode 145, we go all the way back to number 1, where we were both young kids and full of spunk and not the old decrepit things we have become. And again, TrampledUnderfootPodcast.com is sponsored by Steve Nealon over at Harneal Media. If you're thinking about a website, if you want any kind of a presence online other than your social media, but you know how that goes. If you want any kind of a presence online, you need to talk to Steve Nealon. He's not some big faceless, nameless conglomerate that's just going to file you in a corner and give you a number. He is the man, the myth, the legend. You deal with Steve 100% of the time. He can tailor your website for your wants and your needs. He can help you set up merch. He can help you set you up with a print-on-demand company that handles all of the printing, all of the shipping. You just sit back and watch the orders come in. That's Steve Nealon at harnealmedia.com. That's HARNEAL media.com.
Ask about the coasters while you're at it.
Oh, they did Poison Ivy. No, that was the Drifters.
Poison Ivy.
Did the coasters do Under the Boardwalk? No, that was the Drifters too.
And when the sun beats down and burns the tar off the roof.
Yep.
So, folks, we'll catch you. Look, enjoy the rest of your week. We'll catch you here next Tuesday at 9:30 Eastern, 6:30 Pacific. Enjoy the rest and nothing. Be good.
If you can't be good, be careful. All right, that's the audio side. Rick French says, Miley Cyrus licks a hammer and it's sexy. I'll do it and they get thrown out of Home Depot. Well,
that's right.
You know, and then Linda came back and said, it's not the hammer, Rick. It was swinging off the shelves in your underwear. Well, you know, you got to pick your battles. That one was just right there in my face. I had to comment on that. So let's see. We started off gardening, but oh boy. Yeah, man. Yeah, my wife Linda says you're transportation and labor. I'm finance and planning. See, digging is labor, planning is putting a plant in the ground. Okay, well, that's yeah, where we came through. So, Jim Dockrell asks a good question. Here's one for you. Do you think in 40 years they will be reminiscing about a Kanye West album?
I doubt it, but that is my limited. See, we don't know. It's quite possible that there will be a surge of Kanye West and it'll spread like wildfire and it'll be in everybody's homes and their mugs and stores like the Disney store. And it just, we don't know. And people singing it at weddings and we just don't know. Even though it sounds impossible to us because of the given information that we're exposed to, there could be a resurgence because somebody went in a cave, dug it out, and here's the CD box, and it's got a little liner notes, and people study it, and we don't know anything. So anything is possible.
Yeah, anything is possible. And look at the resurgence in popularity of Tupac Shakur. And he was killed how many years ago? I mean, it could very well happen. It could very well happen.
Here's one for you. It could very well be, because we really don't know. We are very unaware of what the future has to offer and in the direction. It could very well be that for one reason, that window sill video that Dockrell puts out, for some reason, a certain keyword, a combination of the situations, maybe the location, maybe something happened in that area 200 years from now. It becomes the iconic representation of Canada in the 2020s because of some sort of like this and that. We don't know anything. We can reason now,
sure,
in a trajectory, but there's so much we don't know of where the roads will branch in the future.
I think if Dockrell's going to go viral, it's going to be that hairstyle. And I'll go on the record right now. His hairstyle will be iconic in 50 years. Yeah, I'm serious. Print it. I'm on the record.
We're talking 7 billion people on the planet currently. Mm-hmm. I don't know that you can have any number of so iconic figures currently on display that all those 7 million people from frickin' Timbuktu to Palestine down to frickin' Australia. It's just an impossibility anymore. Yeah. And even before it was pretty tough. So I don't know at the same time.
Jim also says, sitting by the radio with your cassette recorder and mic up to the speaker, getting PO'd when the announcer talked over the intro of the song you wanted to tape. Oh, yeah, I made many a radio-based mixtape, and radio announcers did that on purpose for just that reason. They wanted some sort of identification where you recorded the music from. That was done on purpose. So...
Now, let me just say one thing. I will say this, just as an aside, within what it could also be. So, for instance, in a situation like and this is me maybe assuming, or assuming, but maybe it's a possibility. In this little group that we have right here now, that we're sharing a moment, we have Mark Lindsay, his wife. I'm sitting here. We have Rick French and Jim Dockrell, and we have who else is out there?
Oh, Frankie CNC and Woodworking. Steve from Harneal Media is out there. Yeah, Greg the Snow Crusher. Daniel Haru jumped in for a little while. I don't know, did he bail on us or what?
Well, we have all these people here sharing a moment, and if you could imagine, it's a little blip on the screen, a little bubble in time, a little moment, a little stamp, a little time signature, where these people from different places were in one little spot at one moment. And we don't know in the future for what reason people will say, oh, look, this little group here, this happened here. I'm not trying to add importance to it or retract importance. I'm just saying that this is a little grouping of human beings, and we don't know. Maybe one of them out there, people are investigating in a genealogical sense, and they find, and by the way, you should pick and choose where you hang out. And so there's a lot of possibilities. I'm just saying, I don't know if you can imagine what I'm trying to put out there, but all these moments matter.
Yeah, it does. It does. Let's see. I just missed it. Good grief. It jumped on me.
Let me see while you're looking. There's a picture. There's a video, a movie from the 1930s of a car driving through New York City that was filmed 100 years ago.
Well, in the 1930s. Yeah.
And roughly. And in that video, they're driving in New York in those little old Model T type, and that video has survived throughout this time, and it was re-released into the YouTubes and stuff. And one guy picked up on it, and he's a genealogist guy, and he said, you know what? We always see these videos, but who are the people in this? And you can clearly see the family in the car. And he went.
Oh, yeah. I saw that.
Okay, so he went and did the investigation and found out the lives of these people and so on and so forth. Those people in any reality could not have imagined that they would be talked about, and specifically in that moment from that video 100 years after, at all. So that's kind of the point that I'm trying to make, that we don't know.
We don't know what's going to happen in the future. Yeah,
right.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm with you there. I did see that video. He went down the list, talked about their driver, and talked about the whole family and everything else, just kind of investigated them down. It was pretty cool. And that was a very cool video.
Yeah.
We need to do a podcast about that. Let's see. Frankie CNC and Woodworking says, I was running the handsaw today and it sounded like Bob Dylan. Okay. Then Greg, the Snow Crusher, came in and said he was washing the cat and it sounded like Yoko Ono. Tough crowd.
That's so uncalled for. You haven't lived until you've sat through a Yoko Ono album. I've never sat through one.
I don't think it's possible. I don't know that it's humanly possible.
I tried to listen to the two Virgins album with Lennon, and that they recorded the night that they spent together, and they put out. And I tried listening to that, and it's just impossible.
Yeah.
It's impossible.
She's the queen of cringe. It's just like no talent there. Go away.
She's making a statement.
Well, yeah, but is a statement.
I just don't get it, but
Yeah.
I get it, but I don't want to get it.
Yeah, I'm glad you get it because I don't want it. Let's see. Cruising on down the list here.
Nothing like stalking a family 100 years later, says Steve.
Yeah, that's true. Rick French says, I've heard that there are people who actually listen to bagpipe music. Yeah, Linda is one of them. She said, I agree with you. The best people listen to bagpipe music. Okay. All right. And I think I am finally caught up. All right. There we go. Jim will be calling at 8. What time do you want to get on the schedule? Oh, okay. I know what that is. Sorry, I shouldn't have been. Yeah, afternoon. That's inside baseball. She's sending me messages. What that is I've got the guy coming out. Spoiler alert for those of you who follow me on my other channel. I've got the guy coming out to do the spray foam insulation, and he called evidently and wanted to know what time, sometime in the afternoon. That's good. So
that's going to be happening.
That's going to be happening finally.
Let's wrap this up.
Okay.
You guys have a great week.
Peace. Yep. Peace to you.